What's up, Wildcats? Mr. Waka here, coming back with our next edition from The Alchemist. It's been about a week or so since my last post. I apologize, but I thank my friend Aaron, I thank Miss Barnhill and Miss Ang and some board members for their readings, so they kept alive our idea of having one adult read each day during this crazy hiatus. But I miss you. To recap where we were at, the boy, he had these visions and this dream of seeing the pyramids and getting a treasure. He got robbed when he went to Africa and Egypt, and it looked like he was just gonna go back and become a shepherd again. He worked for a merchant, saved this money, but instead of going back to becoming a shepherd, he decided, you know what, I'm gonna follow my dream. So here we are. The Englishman was sitting on a bench in a structure that smelled of animals, sweat, and dust. It was part warehouse, part corral. I never thought I'd end up in a place like this, he thought, as he leafed through pages of a chemical journey. 10 years at university, and here I am in a corral. But he had to move on. He believed in omens. All his life and all his studies were aimed at finding the one true language of the universe. He had studied Esperanto, then the world's religions, and now it was alchemy. He knew how to speak Esperanto. He understood all the major religions well, but yet he wasn't yet an alchemist. He had unraveled the truths behind important questions, but his studies had taken him to a point beyond which he could not seem to go. He had tried in vain to establish a relationship with an alchemist, but the alchemists were strange people who thought only about themselves and almost always refused to help him. Who knows? Maybe they had failed to discover the secret of the master work, the philosopher's stone, and for this reason kept their knowledge to themselves. He had already spent much of the fortune left to him by his father, fruitlessly seeking the philosopher's stone. He had spent enormous amounts of time at the great libraries of the world and had purchased all the rarest and most important volumes on alchemy. In one, he had read that, many years ago, a famous Arabian alchemist had visited Europe. It was said that he was more than 200 years old and that he had discovered the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life. The Englishman had been profoundly impressed by the story, but he would never have thought it more than just a myth had a friend of his, returning from an archaeological expedition in the desert, told him about an Arab that was in possession of exceptional powers. He lives in the Al Fayoum oasis, his friend had said, and people say that he is 200 years old, and he is able to transform any metal into gold. The Englishman could not contain his excitement. He canceled all his commitments and pulled together the most important of his books. Now here he was, sitting inside a dusty, smelly warehouse. Outside, a huge caravan was being prepared for crossing the Sahara and was scheduled to pass through Al Fayoum. I'm going to find that darn alchemist, the Englishman thought, and the odor of the animals bit him more tolerable. The young Arab, also loaded down with baggage, entered and greeted the Englishman. Where are you bound to go? Asked the young Arab. I'm going to the desert, the man answered, turning back to his reading. He didn't want any conversation at this point. What he needed to do was review all he had learned over the years, because an alchemist would certainly put him to the test. The young Arab took out a book and began to read. The book was written in Spanish. That's good, thought the Englishman. He spoke Spanish better than Arabic, and if this boy was going to Al Fayoum, there would be someone to talk to when there were no other important things to do. That's strange, said the boy, as he tried once again to read the burial scene that began the book. I've been trying for 2 years to read this book, and I never get past these first few pages. Even without a king to provide interpretation, he was unable to concentrate. But he still had some doubts about the decision he had made. But he was able to understand one thing. When someone makes a decision, he is really diving into a strong current that will carry him to places he never dreamed of when he first made the decision. When I decided to seek out my treasure, I never imagined I'd wind up working in a crystal shop, he thought, and joining this caravan may have been my decision, but where it goes is going to be a mystery to me. Nearby was the Englishman reading a book. He seemed unfriendly and had looked irritated when the boy had entered. They might even have become friends, but the Englishman closed off all conversations. The boy closed his book. He felt that he didn't want to do anything that might make him look like the Englishman. He took Urim and Thummim from his pocket and began playing with them. The stranger shouted, "Urim and Thummim!" In a flash, the boy put them back in his pockets. They're not for sale." "They're not worth that much," the Englishman answered. "They're only made of rock crystal, and there are millions of rock crystals in the earth. But those who know about such things would know that those are Urim and Thummim. I didn't know they had them in this part of the world." "They were given to me as a present by the king," the boy said. The stranger didn't answer. Instead, he put his hand in his pocket and took out 2 stones that were the same stones as the boy's. "Did you say a king?" "I guess you don't believe that a king would talk to a shepherd like me, a shepherd," he said, wanting to end the conversation. "Not at all. It was shepherds who were the first to recognize a king that the rest of the world refused to acknowledge. So it's not surprising that kings would talk to shepherds." And he went on, fearing that the boy wouldn't understand what he's talking about. "It's in the Bible. It's the same book that taught me about Urim and Thummim. These stones were the only form of divination permitted by God. The priests carried them in a golden breastplate." The boy was suddenly happy to be there at this warehouse. "Maybe this is an omen," the Englishman said, half aloud. "Who told you about omens?" The boy's interest was increasing by the moment. "Everything in life is an omen," the Englishman said, now closing the journal he was reading. "There's a universal language understood by everybody, but already forgotten. I am in search of that universal language, among other things. That's why I'm here. I have to find a man who knows the universal language, the Alchemist." The conversation was interrupted by the warehouse boss. "You two are in luck," said the boss. "There's a caravan leaving today for Al-Fayoum." "But I'm going to Egypt," said the boy. "Al-Fayoum is in Egypt. What kind of Arab are you?" "That's a good luck omen," the Englishman said. "If I could, I'd write a huge encyclopedia just about the words luck and coincidence. It's with these words that the universal language is written." He told the boy it was no coincidence that he had met him with Urim and Thummim in his hand. And he asked the boy, too, if he were in search of the alchemist. "No, I'm looking for a treasure," the boy said, and he immediately regretted having said it, but the Englishman appeared not to attach any importance to it. "In a way, so am I," he said. "I don't even know what alchemy is," the boy was saying, when the warehouse boss called them to come inside. "I am the leader of the caravan," said a dark-eyed, bearded man. "I hold the power of life and death for every person I take with me. The desert is a capricious lady, and sometimes she drives men crazy." There are almost 200 people gathered there, 400 animals, camels and horses and mules and fowl. In the crowd were women and children, and a number of men with swords at their belts and rifles slung to their shoulders. The Englishman had several suitcases filled with books. There was a babble of noise, and the leader had to repeat himself several times for everyone to understand what he was saying. "There are a lot of different people here, and each has his own God, but the only God I serve is Allah, and in his name I swear I will do everything possible once again to win out over this desert. But I want each and every one of you to swear by the God you believe in that you will follow my orders no matter what. In this desert, disobedience could mean death." There was a murmur from the crowd. Each was swearing quietly to his or own God. The boy swore to Jesus. The Englishman said nothing, and the murmur lasted longer than a simple vow would have. The people were also praying to heaven for protection. A long note was sounded on a bugle, and everyone mounted up. The boy and the Englishman had brought camels and climbed uncertainly onto their backs. The boy felt sorry for the Englishman's camel, loaded down as he was with cases of books. "There is no such thing as coincidence," the Englishman said, picking up the conversation where it had interrupted in the warehouse. "I'm here because a friend of mine heard of an Arab who—" But the caravan began to move. It was impossible to hear what the Englishman was saying. The boy knew what he was about to describe, though, the mysterious chain of links that links one thing to another, the same chain that had caused him to become a shepherd, that had caused his reoccurring dream that had brought him to the city near Africa to find a king and to be robbed in order to meet a crystal merchant. And the closer one gets to realizing his personal legend, the more that personal legend becomes his true reason for being. The caravan moved towards the east and traveled during the morning, halted when the sun was at its strongest, and resumed late in the afternoon. The boy spoke very little with the Englishman, who spent most of his time with books. The boy observed in silence the progress of the animals and people across the desert. Now everything was quite different from how it had been that day they had set out. Then there had been confusion and shouting, and the cries of children and whining of animals, all mixed with the nervous orders of the guides and the merchants. 1 second. Where am I at? But in the desert, there was only the sound of the eternal wind and the hoofbeats of the animals. Even the guides spoke very little to one another. "I've crossed these sands many times," said one of the camel drivers one night, "but the desert is so huge and the horizons are so distant that it makes a person feel small, as if he should remain silent." The boy understood intuitively what he meant, even without ever having set foot in the desert before. Whenever he saw the sea or a fire, he felt silent, impressed by their elemental force. "I've learned things from the sheep, and I've learned things from the crystal," he thought. "I can learn something from the desert, too. It seems old and wise." The wind never stopped, and the boy remembered the day he had set foot at the fort in Tarifia, with the same wind blowing in his face. It reminded him of the wool from his field, the sheep who were now seeking food and water in the fields of Andalisa, as they had always before. So we'll stop here today. We're making some good progress. I'm going to be doing this the next couple of days. I think we'll be done with our third book within maybe a week or so. As always, stay safe. We miss you. It's sad without you Wildcats. It really is. Go Wildcats.